So, good afternoon and welcome to our first Linnean Lens of 2025. For those of you who are new to Linnean Lens, it's the brainchild of Will Beharrell, who's hidden behind his unopened camera, but present in this meeting. And Will is the librarian here at the Linnean Society, and the aim was to showcase items from our collection through a camera and not only PowerPoint. And really it was an event that was born in COVID, but that has proved so popular that we have kept it going and hold it every 2 months. So if this is your first time, there are lots of other Linnean lenses that have been recorded, and they can all be found on our YouTube channel, and Will's going to put the link to that channel in a second. So as well as Will here to help with the technical aspects of this talk, we have Padma Ghosh, our events manager. And today's Linnean Lens will focus on a mid-16th century book of botany, Leonhard Fuchs' Historia Stirpium. We have 2 copies of this book in our collections. One is uncolored and part of the library of Carl Linnaeus. But it's the other one we're going to focus on today, which is part of our rare book collection. It is a colored copy and is currently on display in our exhibition, in our current exhibition, Still Life Depicting Nature from Woodcuts to X-ray. And Still Life runs until the 28th of 28th of February 2025. So if you want to come and have a look at it, it will be on display until then. To talk about this book, we are absolutely delighted to welcome Professor Sachiko Kusukawa from the History and Philosophy of Science Department at the University of Cambridge, and she is also a fellow at Trinity College. Sachiko's research specialism is in history of science, cultural and intellectual history, and the history of the book. Her recent research has focused on the observational, descriptive, and pictorial practices in the development and production of scientific knowledge in the early modern period. And her work on visual arguments in 16th century botanical and anatomical works has resulted in many publications, and I'm not going to list them all, but they include a monograph entitled Picturing the Book of Nature, published by University of Chicago Press in 2012, which I highly recommend. And in this book, Sachiko describes Fuchs' unique approach to depicting plants. So really, there was nobody better to come and give a talk about our copy of Fuchs. And I thank Sachiko for fitting this into her very busy schedule, and which I know has required a little bit of research on our own copy. So I'm very excited about this. And over to you, Sachiko. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for that very kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here. And before I forget, one crucial thing I ought to do first is to share my PowerPoint, I think. So assuming I remember how to do this. Sharing isn't turned on? Yeah. Okay.
Give us just a second. We failed to give Sachiko co-host, so she can't actually share. It'll come in a minute.
Ah, okay. Right. I may have a chance of getting this right. Yep. And if I do this, right? Okay. Right. So thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be talking about a copy of this book by Leonhard Fuchs. And just a quick introduction about him. Fuchs was a professor of medicine at Tübingen in the 16th century. And the book that he wrote was published in 1542. Now, Fuchs, you may not have heard of, but you're very likely to have come across the plant that was named after him by Charles Plumier in 1703, the fuchsia. Plumier credited Fuchs and honored him in his book because Fuchs had published this book, as Isabel has just introduced, you to the De Historia Stirpium on the history of plants. And it is called a history, but it doesn't mean chronology. It actually means a description for this period. And it's actually quite a big book, usually an average about 37 centimeters high, and it's got about 800 pages. So it's quite big. It's one of the biggest sizes you can have as a printed book in this period. And plants obviously were important for somebody, a physician like Fuchs, because of their medicinal properties. This book was written in Latin, which was the learned language of the time, so that academics could communicate across Europe in the same language. And here I've shown you in the middle the author portrait, which is pretty much at the beginning of this book, showing Fuchs himself. Now, Fuchs was writing in a period characterized by historians as the Renaissance, a time when reviving past achievements of ancient Greece or Rome was a way to contribute to knowledge and scholarship of the present. For the study of plants, the important classical authority was a Greek physician from the 1st century called Dioscorides. And Dioscorides had written a tract on medicinal uses of naturally occurring materials, and generally they were called the materia medica, and these were predominantly on plants. Fuchs's book was about identifying Dioscorides' plant in contemporary Europe and improving understanding of medicinal plants. Dioscorides had promoted the idea of autopsia. He talks about this in his book on Materia Medica, autopsia meaning seeing for himself, in order to study plants properly. And the fact that Fuchs is holding a plant in his hand here, over here, may well be an acknowledgement of this sentiment. Excuse me. One of the really important features of Fuchs's book was that they were illustrated. And it is in fact very unusual for the time that we actually have a picture, a printed portrait of the artist involved, which was printed at the end of the book. Here you see, and we even know the names of these artists. So over here you see Heinrich Fühlmaurer, and this one, this artist is called Albrecht Meyer, and here is Veit Rudolf Specklin. So what you see here is, in fact, Meyer drawing a plant from a plant actually in a vase, and then the drawing being transferred to a wood block over here by Fühlmaurer, and then the sculptor here, the woodcutter, Specklin, then cutting the wood block such that it would become a relief print of images. And the fact that Fuchs had included these artists clearly is an indication of how proud he was of the illustrations then that they had produced for him. And I've shown you here a few examples of what these woodcuts actually look like. They are actually quite an unusual style in the sense that they're almost diagrammatic in their emphasis on outlines, and it has minimal shading. And there's no indication of wear or tear. You don't see a broken twig or insect-eaten leaf or what have you. It is, all the parts of the plant are pristine in their condition. And this is something that Fuchs actually had said in the preface, that the minimal shading and the focus on clean lines delineating the shape of the plant was deliberate, as was the attempt to include all parts of the plant. So roots, leaves, shoots, flowers, seed pods. In nature, shadows are naturally cast in a particular direction and length, depending on the time and place. The minimal shading and no shadows shown at all gives the impression of each plant hovering timelessly on the page. This diagrammatic delineation in fact, isn't complete as such, in the sense that Fuchs, when describing these plants in the text accompanying these images, he actually talks about color. And in fact, so these woodcuts were meant to be colored, like so. And in this period, coloring was something additional that purchaser could pay for. And of course, that means that not all surviving copies are colored, but we have one here at Cambridge University Library, and we'll be looking at a colored copy also here in the Linnean Society. And you can see what coloring does here. It actually really shows up each part of the plant rather well. And it also shows how these pictures are very carefully designed. So here, for example, you can see that the leaves had been curled in such a way so that both sides of the leaves can be shown. Very often in Fuchs's images, you will see flowers being shown from various points of view, not just from the front, but also from the side. Another thing that Fuchs was very careful about was he wanted it to be complete. So he would show the stages of growth in terms of showing the flowering stage as well as the fruiting stage all in one bush. Furthermore, coloring actually does something interesting. That's to say, it actually adds further information. So this woodcut of the dead nettle, in the text, Fuchs says that there are 3 variations, one with yellowish flowers, one with white flowers, and then also pinkish flowers. And so here, then, in one bush, you actually he's actually showing you the 3 variations that's possible in nature. Also here with the Rosa canina, he does something similar, and you'll see the red flowers as well as the white ones. And this is really, and I'm not the first person to say this, this is actually a really interesting way of representing plants, because Fuchs is really trying to include all its variations, but also all its stages of its growth in one image and on one bush. And so a lot of historians have noted that these are actually like a composite pictures that tries to show the plant in all its aspects. And there was, and this is not accident, this was deliberate on the part of Fuchs, in the sense that there was an intellectual reason for doing this at the time. There was a reason for having a blemish-free, shadow-free delineation designed to include all parts of the plant, because it reflected the idea at the time that a scientific object had to be a complete and generalized object. That's to say, a scientific knowledge of a plant and its medicinal virtues, medicinal efficacy, wasn't actually about this or that particular plant or specimen that you may come across in nature. That medicinal efficacy had to be applicable to all instances of the same species, and therefore plants as an object of study had to have had to be understood at a general level. And this is a style of depicting plants then that really became quite popular, or certainly influential, all the way to the middle of the 17th century. But before I show you some other images. Let me just quickly also show you some images or other images from Fuchs's Historioscopium. And these are, in fact, the first printed images of New World plants. And you see the marigold, the maize, and chili pepper, and the pumpkin. Yeah. And here, as I just mentioned, you have examples of Fuchs's aloe then being copied throughout the ages, all the way down to 1650 in Jan Bohan's Universal History of Plants. So Fuchs's images were really influential in botanical literature of the 16th and 17th century. In a moment, so I'd like to have a look at the Linnean copy, but in order to do that, it may be just worth pointing out the names that I'll be mentioning in terms of ownership. So this copy appears to have arrived in the Linnean when John Sims, the founder member of the Society, gave it to the library. But before that, we know that it was in the ownership of Hans Sloane, physician, fellow, and president of the Royal Society and Royal College of Physicians. And he was a very famous collector, and you probably know that his collection was the foundation collection of the British Museum. And we also have an inscription from relating to the famous bookseller contemporary to Sloane, Nathaniel Noel, and he was a very famous supplier of books to the collector Edward Harley, the second Earl of Oxford. You can find information about Noel and Sloane on this website by David Pearson on book owners, and historians of book regularly look at provenances to understand not just circulation of books, but sometimes try to find or identify annotations in surviving books. Now, in order to show you the connection to Sloane, I will have to draw your attention to this particular bit of information. So Sloane had many catalogues of his collection, and one of which was called the Min collection, Min coming from miniatura, meaning colored or illustrated. And he gathered under that catalogue books as well as manuscripts which had images in them. And these catalogues now have been photographed and also transcribed in a project called Enlightenment Architectures, and you can find this page from that website. And indeed, this is a photograph from there. And I don't know whether you can actually see this, but there are, so Sloane catalogued and recatalogued his books quite frequently. So you have numbers like 242, 127 crossed out, but then here 127 again, or 88. And there are, they relate to different publications or manuscripts of books. But the important one for the moment here is 127, and it's here it's transcribed 127 is the printed book illuminated or colored, which I'd just like you to note for the moment. And this is a copy from the a copy of a book from the British Library, where this is what an inscription might look like of a book that was catalogued under the Min catalogue. It says Bibliotheca Sloanianae Min 35. So the Min number tells me that it is most likely going to be a Sloane book. So I think I'm going to exit my PowerPoint at this point, if I may, and move on to the copy at the Linnean. Right. Have I stopped sharing? I have now. I have now. Right. Okay. Thank you. Right. So let me start off by showing you. So I am going to start off with this page. And I don't know whether it's a bit faint, but I hope you can see this. It's presented to the Linnean Society by Dr. Sims, 1816. So this is the date when it came into the Linnean Society. And above that, I wonder if you can see in a much older hand and ink, duplicate Min 127. This tells me that this was a book that was once in Sloane's ownership. Okay. And I don't know whether you can see here also, it's a Min 2 something, 200 and something, but above it, there is a 127 that's been crossed out. I'm not entirely sure what the significance of crossing this out is, but certainly it at least gives me, it's a big clue that certainly this was once a Sloane book. I'm now just going to move to the back of this book. Oh. Aha, here we are. So this is right at the back of the book, and there is an inscription here. Donum amicissimum mi, viri Nathaniele Noel, Bibliopolis Londoniense, Pridier Calendri, September 1722. So it says, this is a gift from a good friend, Nathaniel Noel, bookseller in London, 1st of September 1722. So right now my conjecture is potentially this may be the point at which 1722 may be the point at which this book entered Sloane's collection, though I actually don't really know whose handwriting this is, but they are contemporaries, and this may be a reasonable guess. Okay, just going to close it and get to the front again. So one of the things that, well, I'm a book historian rather than a botanist, and what really an interesting thing for book historians is that, how should I put it, the more inscription, sort of, there's more handwriting or there's more evidence of wear and tear, it makes the copy a lot more interesting because it shows that it's been used in the past, and there's a lot of information then we have about then what people thought about the book. Now, you'll see from here that the page has been cut at some point, and then it's been strengthened with an additional paper. And this could have happened earlier or later in the history of this particular copy. But what's interesting is that we have some evidence to suggest that the mending of, so the addition of this paper must have been fairly early, because you will see here some handwriting. It's 16th century or 17th century, really neat handwriting, where somebody has actually put in information that was originally in the margins of the printed page, as well as writing out the bits that had been lost from the damage. So this means that the mending may have happened much, much earlier. Okay. Right. I'm just going to show you here then the portrait of Fuchs, and you can just about see the plant. And in surviving copies, Fuchs's dress or coat have many colors. And I've shown you a pink version in Cambridge. That's a bit unusual. They do tend to be black or blue. And this is a black version. And you can see Fuchs's age at his age at 41. It's a portrait. And so the author portrait is at the front, and the artist's portrait is right at the back. Here you can see then Albrecht Meyer, and then Füllmaurer, and then Specklin. And this might be actually a good occasion to point out how fine the cutting is. So these are lines you can see of the roots of this particular plant. Now, this is an image produced by wood blocks. That's to say, it's relief printing in the sense that you keep the inkable parts proud, and you cut away the bits that are going to be white or not printing, that it won't print. So you really have to cut really finely to be able to then produce this effect. So you can actually see the technique and the fine technique used by Specklin over here. Okay. Now, I started suggesting that we have inscriptions or clues as to the owner of past owners of this book. It's worth noting that there is another inscription here, which unfortunately is very, very faded. So we can't really quite work out the full name, but it seems to say John somebody, his book. So this is then another inscription indicating that there was another earlier owner of this book. Also, really nice thing about this book is there are quite a lot of underlinings throughout the text, which indicate that this book was something, and over here, this book was something that was read rather carefully. And you can see that it was important for the readers to be able to have a full index so that they can actually look at, find the entries on plants that they wanted to read about. And let me also show you another clue in terms of an earlier reader is here, Utra specie de Abrotona. And there's another similar, in the similar hand. I think this is different from the earlier hand that I've shown you. And here's another one, Tankagem, which I understand is Portuguese for the plantain plant. So that's to say, at least there was another hand, another person writing Portuguese names against this image. And this is one of the things that we very often find in historical botanical books, is that contemporary readers, when they annotated their copies, they often put down the name, the vernacular name, the local name by which such a plant was known. And it shows how then this kind of generalized Latinate scientific image of a plant was translated into the world of the reader with local information, such as the vernacular name for it. And sometimes you even have examples of annotations where they say where in their locality they've seen this particular plant. And here again, you see then underlining, indicating a close reading of the book. I'm now just going to go through some of the images so that you'll get a sense of the images and in this book, as well as how really beautiful this particular copy is. And here's a image of an aquilegia. And this is one of the things that Fuchs often does, is to show flowers from different angles. And let me go to another one. And here again, you can see the coloring rather beautifully done. And this is another example of a composite picture of a carnation with differently colored flowers. And here you have the other type of composite diachronic way of showing then the plant at a different stage of growth, including here are the flowering bits and here are the fruiting stage. Yeah. And I wanted to show this particular plant. It's called Mala insana, or the crazy, insane apple, otherwise known to us as the aubergine. And this is an interesting inclusion because this particular plant seems to have been around for quite a bit. And Fuchs here actually says that, well, actually, he doesn't actually know any proper medicinal use for this. But he says that actually some brave people like eating it, and they eat it with a bit of oil, salt, and pepper, and it's cooked as they cook mushrooms, and apparently they say it is delicious. And here is an example, another example of a composite image of Rosa canina, the white version and the red flowers, as you can see here. Okay. Here, again, different stages of the flowering. I'm just showing you that coloring really brings out the details of the design, and they do make things look really quite vibrant. And here is the chili pepper. Okay. And this one is a composite image in that says it is the large chili pepper and the small chili pepper. And he says that the bigger version has redder capsules and the smaller version has a darker caption, and that's captured in this particular image and beautifully colored. Okay. Here you can see a rather different use of coloring for the red beet. Okay. And here you have the maize. In Latin, it's called Turcicum frumentum, so it's a Turkish corn. And Fuchs knew that this plant hadn't originated in Europe, but he wasn't quite sure where it came from. And essentially, non-European ones he tends to call Turkish. That's the Turkish was exotic enough for him in the period. And here you can actually see then the corn cob having 4 colors. Now, he actually says in the text that the corn cob for the Turkish corn comes in 4 different colors, yellow, whitish, purplish, and reddish. But he also says, but if you look at the image, because it will be painted in this stripy way, you may think that the corn cob is going to be 4-colored. And he's saying that's not the case. Each corn cob will have just one color. So that's to say that he had a full awareness of the fact that his audience will have a colored version in front of them when they were reading his text. Right? Okay, so this is pretty much the range of images that I wanted to show you, and I could just keep on flicking through, but I just wonder whether this might be a good time to pause and take some questions, Isabel.
Sure. Yep. There's a few in the Q&A box, and if anyone has any more questions for Sachiko, don't hesitate to put it in the Q&A box. Thank you, Sachiko. I just have one of our members of staff who texted me saying, "Wow, I had no idea our copy was so colorful." So,
it's
so thank you.
fantastic. It's fantastic, beautiful. Yeah.
I love it. I think it's a great holding to have. Yes, and look at that one, the blue. It's incredible. Okay, so there's a few questions. There's a few questions about the making of the book. So someone asked, was it possible to preserve the wood blocks, or are they seen as surplus to requirement after the fact?
Interesting question. So wood blocks, they are actually quite expensive to make, and it takes a long time to have certainly 500 blocks made. We think it took Specklin probably about 4 or 5 years to create 500 plus wood blocks, and this would have been an expensive outlay. So what then the printer did was that it was reused immediately for a German edition, so that one could recoup a bit of the investment originally made. And I believe in the case of these wood blocks, they were not used by the printer for the rest of the printer's lifetime, but they somehow emerged in the 18th century to be used again in a different botanical work. Fuchs and Isengrin, the printer, they clearly realized that they had something really rather unusual, something fantastic that they had hit on. That is to say, using images to understand plants. And so 3 years later, in 1545, they make a smaller octavo book and Specklin makes the much smaller, but really accurately copied woodcuts, 500, again, more than 500 of them. And what happens with those wood blocks is then they are used and reused several times. So in fact, I guess what I'm trying to say is that wood blocks were, because they were such an important material investment, they tried to reuse it again and again and again. And so, yeah, you don't throw them away that easily.
No, and in fact, if you want to see some wood blocks, we have some in the exhibition at the moment on Still Life, which are the shelf just above Fuchs, and these are from 1702, and we've got about 90 of these wood blocks from a Swedish naturalist called Rudbeck, who published a book of plants as well. So they do survive, but I understand Fuchs's wood blocks don't survive. We were discussing this earlier on.
Yeah, the 42 ones, I think once they were used in the 18th century, I believe that they don't surface again. But then some, because apparently Fuchs was thinking of doing volume 2 or 3, but never got around to getting the another full set of new wood blocks. And it appears that there are some uncut wood blocks that are found here and there, and potentially in Vienna, where all the original drawings are. But yes, you're right, and we don't know where they went. but they were kept. They were kept, and certainly it was wood blocks. We know that wood blocks were used and reused, and also loaned out to other printers once you felt that you've used them enough. Yeah.
Thank you. So there's quite a few questions. There's some about the botany. There's a lot about coloring. But first of all, Helen asks, is it known how many would have been printed originally?
Oh, I wish I knew. We don't have any record of. We don't have any conclusive record of how many were printed, but it is usually said this kind of academic book, pretty big ones, somewhere between 500 and 800 copies at a time, but this is just guesswork.
Yeah. Certainly, it's quite common in libraries. It's not uncommon.
It's not uncommon, but the reason for that may be because this is a really big and beautiful book. You really want to hold on to.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a few questions about. There's a question about the font, but I'm not sure that I understand the question about the font of the 127 book. I don't know if this is about the font that's used in the printing, and I don't know whether that's a question that you're able to answer.
The font of the type, do we think? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what the question refers to.
Right. So in terms of these types, these are fairly standard Roman types, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's quite also quite common to have these pictorial initials, and usually at the and this is actually a continuation from manuscript conventions where you start ahead of a chapter or a section with a big capital letter, usually illuminated, and this is something that a printed book also continues to do. For example, here, yeah, don't know whether you can see. Yes, and over here, yeah.
So yeah, that's good. Yeah. Thank you, Sachiko. There's actually loads of questions coming in, so I'm gonna stay on the wood blocks a little bit longer because there's a couple of questions asking about the type of wood. Yeah, let's start with that. The type of wood usually used in wood blocks.
Usually, and here I'm actually drawing on other scholars and other historians of the book. It's usually said that it's either pearwood or boxwood that's used for wood blocks.
Yeah, just to say that we had an earlier Linnean lens on wood blocks, on Rudbeck's wood blocks, where that a lot of that is covered too. So just go to our YouTube channel and find that one.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to the coloring because it's quite a lot. And there are some questions that keep coming back to talk about the source of the colors and what would have been used to do the coloring, and are these watercolors? What type of colors are being used, basically?
Yeah. Thank you. Great question that allows me to elaborate more on the coloring practices. So in this period, as I said, if you wanted a printed book colored, you usually did have to have it hand colored. Now, there's an interesting case of I'm going to go back to the dead nettle here. This dead nettle. What's interesting is that of the colored copies I've seen, and I'm not the only person who's actually said that either, that when you see a colored copy of the dead nettle, somehow it's always yellow, pink, and white in that order from left to right. in the way that the coloring is done. And Agnes Arber, whose book on herbals, published in the early 20th century, still a very important work, was one of the first people to note this was the case. And what she did say or suggest was that copies with this ordering of coloring may well share the same source. That's to say, it's more than likely that the printer had a master copy which had the coloring done to, we expect, Fuchs's specification. And then the colorists then followed the coloring of that model. And that's why then the coloring goes yellow, pink, white, because that's not the order in which it is discussed in the text, but this is the order in which many copies have had their coloring set. Now, what kind of pigment they used, so far as I can see, they seem to be watercolor, watercolors rather than a thick, opaque type of pigment. Yeah, but I don't think there's ever been a pigment analysis done on these, so not on any of the copies. So I actually don't know what content, what kind of pigment they derive from.
Thank you. Someone asked that they've noticed that some of the coloring is bleeding into the opposite page, and I think that was very much noticeable with the peppers, because we discussed this.
Yes. Shall we have another look at that?
Yeah. They're asking, is this because of the type of pigments?
It's very, so it's this one. So again, I'm not a sort of proper art historian, so I actually don't know. But yes, we noticed that somehow the red from this side has kind of leached on here, and some of the red here has kind of got stuck on this side. I think it goes like this one. Yeah, okay. I'm not in, so if it was a kind of leachable, if the pigment was that strong, I expect it to somehow affect the other side of the page more. Actually, there is a bit of watermark, which suggests that this particular thing may have happened because some water was spilt on this part of the page, and then it was closed up quickly without noticing. But again, this is just my conjecture. But there aren't that many examples of this kind of damage. So I'm wondering whether this was something just unique to this particular page, rather than something about the pigment, because it's not happening. I think this is the same pigment of red used for the next page.
Yeah.
And it's not happening. Now, I'm not entirely sure whether you can actually tell that from here. If you look at this from an angle, I don't know whether I can do this. I wonder if you can tell that the red pigment is actually quite shiny.
Yes, I noticed that as well. I'm not sure. Oh yes, a little bit. The top right one, you can see a little bit that it does shine. Yeah.
Yeah. So it feels as if, so in addition to the pigment, they may be using some special kind of binding material that gives this kind of sheen. Yeah.
Thank you. Roger Gaskell, who gave our talk about the woodblocks, actually asks whether you could say something about the difference in coloring between different copies. He says the Linnean Society copy seems particularly fine and detailed.
Yes, it is indeed fine and detailed. And what I think, I mean, Roger would know this also, in the sense of it's actually quite difficult. And I wonder sometimes whether some of the coloring is later, that it's a later application because some of the pigments feel as if that they might be, how should I put it? They may feel a bit unusually, or sort of somewhat unusual for the time. This is actually a really interesting question. Part of me thinks, was there potentially a contemporary practice of, how could I put it, a fine deluxe copy coloring, colored version, and a not so fine colored version, and that readers could in fact, not readers, purchasers could choose between different sort of levels of coloring. But I don't know. I mean, the issue, I guess, is we need to have sufficient numbers of copies to be able to do some sort of close comparative analysis. And I don't think I've actually had the time or enough data to be able to do anything systematic. So I'm afraid I can't answer Roger's question fully.
That's fine. I'm conscious of the time. There's one more question about illustration, and then I think we'll move to the botanical ones. Rebecca Benson asked whether there are any illustrations that are particularly useful for telling whether one specific copy was colored after the fact. I'm not sure what she means, actually, even now that I've read it.
One of the things, well, and one of the things I always do with the colored copies, I go to the dead nettle first, usually to find whether, you know, the copying, the coloring order. And so far I have found one where the coloring order is not the same, for example. But but then I still don't know what that would mean without actually looking at how a particular colored copy might differ in many more aspects from another copy. So I showed you here earlier the Rosa canina having red and white flowers, but the way that they are arranged are different actually from the Cambridge copy. So there are variations. So it's very difficult to make any generalized statements at the moment.
Thank you. Okay, there's a few about the actual plants and whether Fuchs was more of a classifier or an artist, but also David Solomon asks, to what extent did Fuchs emphasize the concept of species as opposed to varieties? He says the three colors of lamium on the picture you showed us at the beginning are actually different species and do not interbreed. And does he make that distinction? Is he aware of that?
No, I'm afraid at this point it's in terms of information about classification, it's really quite basic, I would say, at this point. And so and one of the things, of course, I didn't actually say, I should have said, is the way this book is organized is alphabetical. So he doesn't, so, you know, it starts with absinthe, so it starts with A, and it goes all the way. So there is no, so from that, in that sense, he's actually not trying to attempt a classification. It's more a kind of, if you like, a first stab at saying this is a plant that Dioscorides had called X. Now, towards the end, well, towards the end of the 16th century, Dodonius, for example, starts to try to group plants morphologically so things that look similar, he starts thinking that they must belong to the same group. But in terms of genus and species, these are really quite, I mean, he has a sense of, Fuchs has a sense of grouping, but they are not kind of in a way scientifically sophisticated in the way that we might expect in modern times.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions about the presence of American plants in there, and people want to know where he learned about them, who sent him plant specimens, and hang on, I've lost the second questions. Yes, and how much of the book consists of native European plants, and how many are recently introduced or recently understood by the European public at that point?
I'd say most of them are European, but so by them, there may be quite a few originally from somewhere elsewhere, but by then naturalized forms of plants. But so the American plants that I've shown you are pretty much the ones that he says are Turkish or not German. Where did he get them from? He actually doesn't say, but we should note, of course, that in this period there were a lot of exotic plants that were coming in from the New World, and particularly the Augsburg merchants called the Fuggers were very well known for introducing a lot of the flora and fauna from the New World at the time into the German lands. So it may well be that it's from one of those trading companies that that these plants came into the possession, or certainly something that Fuchs had come across in Germany.
Thank you. And further about the content, Stacey Stolt, who's joining us from the US, hello Stacey, asks, can you talk a little bit about the facing pages? Because there are descriptions by Dioscorides and Pliny. Are they very different description from Fuchs's own descriptions?
No, so, okay, right here, he, so what happened, so the text is set up like this. So first of all, he talks about names, what the Greeks call the plant, the Latin, then the sort of Latin literature called them, and then usually also German names. And then here's the form, and this is where he would cite or talk about the descriptions found in Dioscorides, and this is when he'll start matching it with the picture. Locus means whereabouts, or what kind of place, in the humid places, or sometimes you'd say you'll find it only in your gardens or in dry places where the plant would grow. And then the next one, tempus, would mean when it flowers, and so on. And temperamentum, this is fairly important in the sense that it's actually about medicinal or culinary uses and effects, and hot, whether they're hot or cold or wet, etc., would also be listed there. And then it lists then the medicinal virtues, vires, from Dioscorides. So he would say, this is what it says, Dioscorides says, and this is what Pliny says. So it's a kind of, he's showing that he knows his classical authors and he's citing them. And usually when there is no other comment, it means that he's happy to just accept them as such. Yeah.
Thank you. That's perfect. There's still about 11 questions left. I don't think we're going to, so apologies to everyone that I haven't covered. I don't think we're going to get through all of them. I think it might be nice to go back to the book in a way to end. There's quite an interesting question, actually. Do you know any of copies of Fuchs printed on vellum?
I have not come across one,
No.
but if Roger is in the audience, Roger may know.
Yeah. Anyway, I thought it was an unexpected question.
Well, it's not as strange as it could be,
Yeah.
because there are some scientific books that were that were printed on vellum,
Yeah.
like Vesalius's Epitome, but but this one, I have not come across one. It's slightly difficult, but it's not impossible to print on vellum. Yeah.
Two more that I want to finish with. Who would have owned a book like this one? Was it mostly scholars of botany?
Scholars, not necessarily scholars of botany, but learned people. There are some people who are not necessarily physicians even. We have some ownership marks which indicate just people who seem to be generally interested in scientific matters may well own a copy like this. But this is not a cheap book at the time. It is big and beautiful and expensive. So and it's a kind of thing that if you are a professor at a university, you can afford. If you're a sort of scholarly minded, famous merchant, you can afford. But if you're an impecunious student, maybe not.
Yeah, yeah. And let's finish with our first question, actually, which brings us all the way back to the portrait of Fuchs at the beginning. Cheryl Sands is asking whether you know what the plant is he's holding is and why he chose to be portrait with it.
Okay, this one.
Yeah.
I am not the person who has identified it. A colleague of mine, I believe, identified it as a Germander speedwell. I have no idea why he would have chosen it. And it's not clear to me that we can be so specific, that it is that particular plant. And because he doesn't talk about it as if it is, one of his most, beloved or particularly striking kind of plant. So I don't know, but I think it is striking that because most of the portraits of authors of academic books at the time usually hold the book. He's holding a plant, and I think that's something quite interesting.
Significant, yeah. Well, thank you. We end appropriate with something more to discover, which is always good. Thank you so much, Sachiko. That was absolutely brilliant.
It's my pleasure.
Lovely to have you. I'll just finish by saying that our exhibition still runs until the 20th of February. So do come in if you can. Our next exhibition will be on naturalist notebooks, and that will open on Tuesday, the 11th of March. And our next Linnean Lens will take place on the 4th of March, and it will consist of a paper conservation demonstration by one of our volunteers, John Abbott, who used to work at the National Archives. We're very lucky to have him. It's not on our website yet, but details will be up very soon on our website. So join us then if you can, and do visit us once we reopen next week. It remains me to thank again Sachiko for a brilliant talk, and to thank all of you for coming in. Apologies for ending slightly late, and see you next time. Thank you. Bye.